Cool, cool. We're making content here, and yeah, I want to pull up the Democracy Now video. As I just mentioned, the Democracy Now content's not great unless they have a really good guest on, like Vijay Prashad, who's got really great takes on geopolitics and especially the war in Ukraine. Let's pull that up, and away we go. 7:20.
This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez, the head of the
Ross, longtime follower, first-time chatter. Do you get your checks directly from Putin, or do you have some sort of auto-pay thing set up? That's really funny, okay? You think that's funny? You think this is a joke? Well, here's the truth. I don't know where to take my check. It says First Bank of Moscow. What bank can cash a check like that? I don't even know.
IMF, the International Monetary Fund, warned Thursday that Russia's invasion of Ukraine will lead to more hunger and social unrest across the globe.
Do you see Amy's framing?
The IMF managing director, Kristalina Georgieva, spoke.
They're literally hawking IMF talking points? Just shut up and let VJ talk.
In Washington.
Imagine being VJ listening to this and being like,
in the past 7 weeks, the world has experienced a second major crisis, a war on top of a pandemic. This risks eroding much of the progress we have made over the past 2
well, girl boss action at the IMF. Nice little global mafia action at the IMF. Girl boss time. Let's go.
years climbing back from COVID. Add to this the growing threat of fragmentation into geopolitical.
Oh my God, look at the floor. It almost it almost looks like the Black Sun.
And economic blocks. In a world where war in Europe creates hunger in Africa, where a pandemic can circle the globe in days.
I can't get over it right now. Oh, Lordy.
And reverberate for years, where emissions anywhere means rising sea levels everywhere. The threat to our collective prosperity from a breakdown in global cooperation cannot be overstated. The root cause.
Shut the fuck up with this. I gotta get a good screen cap.
In global cooperation cannot be overstated. The root cause of what we face today is the war. And it is the war that
that looks way too similar.
Must.
Oh my God.
End.
IMF Managing Director Kristalina Georgieva
Why is she,
speaking Thursday.
Why does Democracy Now! Have IMF talking points?
More about how the war in Ukraine is reverberating around the world. We're
Amy.
joined by
Come on, Amy. You know what you're doing. She has to know what she's doing right now. What the fuck, right? Is she just like framing this so that Vijay Prashad can respond to it? One would fucking hope. I hate, personally, being on my show and uncritically sharing the worst propaganda. Was that a donut and a Wolfsangel? I don't know what's going on here. All right, so I really hope this is for the best, but Amy does this all the time. She literally was talking yesterday. She's like, well, CIA Director William Burns said blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, why are you just saying it uncritically? Can you at least go fucking CIA Director? Like, give it some emphasis, Amy.
Speaking Thursday. To talk more about how the war in Ukraine is reverberating around the world, we're joined by Vijay Prashad, director of the Tricontinental Institute for Social Research and chief correspondent of Globetrotters. He's the author.
What is that? That is cool.
Of many books, including The Poorer Nations, A Possible History of the Global South, and Washington Bullets, A History of the CIA coups and assassinations.
I'm sorry, it's just a little bit quiet, I meant to say. And in the same moment, I was thinking about my cold coffee, and I need to get more.
Vijay Prashad is joining us from Santiago, Chile. Welcome to Democracy Now! Vijay, if you can talk about how Russia's war on Ukraine is reverberating across the globe.
First, Amy, Happy New Year. It's Happy New Year in my birth area of Bengal today. It's an interesting period to commemorate the end of a year, which one thought would bring us, as the head of the IMF said, out of the pandemic. And instead, of course, it's brought us into war and sanctions. I want to remind people that a decade ago, when there was a drought in Ukraine and in Russia, where about 25% of the world's wheat is exported into, when there was that drought in 2010, there was a major uprising, not only in the Arab world, which we call the Arab Spring, but across the African continent, now long forgotten, I think. It's important to remember that when there's a crisis in food, and when food prices go up, the political crisis is almost immediate. There's already been an economic crisis in Sri Lanka that's metastasized into a political crisis. We've seen the government fall in Pakistan. Around the world, we see food price inflation create serious problems for governments. Before this war and the sanctions against Russia, 2.7 billion people struggled with hunger. It's likely that we'll go above 3 billion before the month is over. We're also going to see, I think, catastrophic problems with disruptions in fuel distribution. But I want to say one thing about this, Amy, that, it looks, when you watch the news, perhaps in the West, it looks like a world of certainty. Everybody seems clear about what's happening. In the rest of the world, I think people are really trying to breathe in the contradictions. They understand that this is a ghastly war, but there have been ghastly wars before this. I think there's some perplexity about why this war is treated as so different than other wars. I think in the contradictions, countries are not willing to break ties with Russia or to cut the import of grain and fuel from places like Russia. They have their own populations to take care of, and they have to consider their needs and their desires.
And Vijay, I wanted to ask you, it's not only the governments of many of these countries that are not buying into the call for sanctions on Russia, but some of the public opinion polling has shown that in...
Welcome in, Thwomp Thing. First time chatter. Those did look great. I love bread. I love it. I'm about to make me a slice of toast, little butter on top. Let's go.
In many countries, in Indonesia, in Brazil, in South Africa, in many countries in the global South, the public has a different opinion about this war as well.
Well, there's no question that this is a terrible war. I mean, like all wars, this is brutal, this is nasty, and so on.
Hey, guys.
But let's take an example. There was an appalling bombing of the
Blueberry,
maternity
welcome in.
Hospital in Mariupol.
I hope you liked it.
Immediately thereafter, the U.S. government talked about war crimes. The International Criminal Court was suborned to say that this is going to have a file open, for war crimes personally against Mr. Putin and so on. But have we forgotten the Amaria shelter? 1,500 civilians killed in 1991 when the United States bombed a shelter, knowing full well there were civilians there. No question of any interrogation of war crimes. The language of war crimes was not used. In Libya,
there was absolutely no talk at the time of removing the United States from the UN Security Council or anything like that.
After NATO quite ruthlessly bombed that country, Peter Olsen of NATO, the lead attorney, said openly, look, NATO can't commit war crimes. War crimes are committed by other people, not by NATO. I mean, just this recent month, there were Israeli airstrikes which struck the Rimal Medical Center. 2 doctors killed. Do we know their names? Ayman Abu Al-Auf and Moen Alolu. I mean, they were killed in the middle of all this, but there was no question of calling the Israeli strikes war crimes. So this kind of open rank hypocrisy, I think, is what is striking lots of...
They specifically thanked Jake Hanrahan at the end of the video.
People around the world. I have to say, Juan, that, you know, I made a speech in Glasgow where I questioned the colonial mentality.
I think they should stick to the satirical. They're very good at it. If that motherfucker's got no theory, then he's gonna fuck up.
Of the West regarding climate policy. That speech has been viewed by hundreds of millions of people on WhatsApp groups all around the world, including by right-wing WhatsApp groups in India. People are frustrated with the kind of colonial way in which the Western powers and the Western media reports things. The very fact that you know the flag coloring of Ukraine, but have no idea what the flag of Yemen looks like, what the flag of Palestine looks like, what the flag of the Congo looks like, and needless to say, what the flag of Iraq looks like. I mean, that has frustrated
Gosh.
a lot of people and is driving public opinion.
All right. I hate to keep pausing Vijay Prashad and not listening to his points, but I'm also talking about this specifically because of the West's hypocrisy. And a lot of the West have a lot of super duper hypocrisy going on because they don't have an understanding. And if I listen to Vijay Prashad, I'd probably have a better understanding. Split! Thank you for the 200 biddies. Did I mute that? Oh, I remembered. I got to fix the thing. Okay. So again, I'm talking about this video specifically, and I brought it up specifically because partially in response to the shit lib the responses that I got to my video on Andrew Callahan's Channel 5 video in Ukraine. I think what he's doing is he's sort of doing this thing where he goes from satire to serious to sort of satire, and he goes a little back and forth. I honestly think he should just stick closer to the satire side. This is what he's better at. Someone had a thoughtful comment I wanted to bring in. Gives plausible deniability. Someone said when he's not in the suit, he is serious. When he's not in the suit, he's serious. And when he's in the suit, he's not serious. Is that the deal? Is that the deal? It's got a little backwards thing? That's funny. I like that. I'm not... Here's the thing. If he leans into the political, into the more serious stuff, the political stuff, he's going to get it wrong because he's sort of a young guy and he doesn't have great analysis at this point. I'm saying this as someone who has bad analysis and I'm trying to get better. I'm saying this as someone who just like 2 years ago, I was a shit lib. You know, I would have looked at a response like my own to that video that I just made and I would have been yelling at me, oh, you're a Putin apologist. I probably would have been saying that just 2, maybe 3 years ago, right? So I'm keeping that in mind. I'm staying humble here. And I'm not mad at Andrew. I really like him. I like his content. I love his content. That video wasn't great. It was a little sus. And I just I'm just I don't know. I'm just pointing it out. And that it is what it is. You know, they're making content. I'm making content. They're trying to get clicks, doing their thing. I'm getting clicks, doing my thing. Yeah. Yeah, and it was also blatant trauma baiting. We didn't even bring that up. Blatant trauma baiting. So I hope Andrew the best. I hope he continues to make really great content. And I hope that if he gets into more serious stuff in the middle of a geopolitical conflict, in the middle of the conflict, going into the war zone and getting like select interviews, it makes you wonder how he got those interviews. I'm curious how that worked out. I'm just curious. And like, you got to remember, we're in the middle of the fog of war. This is worth repeating every fucking day because we're going to be looking back on what's happening like now, like things today that they're reporting on, things that they've been talking about for the past few weeks and month here. I guess month and a half, right? Specifically those things that have been reported on since the beginning of the Russian invasion, they're calling it, right? We're going to be looking back on some of these things and we're going to be like, holy shit, whoa, we thought it was this way and it turned out to be this way. We thought it was that and it turned out to be this, right? We're going to be learning about this shit for years to come. It's really important to be super duper skeptical in a time like this. Even of me. Yes, be skeptical of me. I wouldn't respect you if you did. You wouldn't respect me if I demanded your, allegiance. Obviously, this isn't a debate channel, but you get the idea, y'all. All right. With that, getting back to Vijay Prashad. To his credit, I think to this point, to this credit, he is the kind of guy that can sort of hang out with people. Fuck, I don't want to say that. Even if they're white supremacists, like, I think he's best off if he's doing that kind of stuff, just sticking with the satire. Because then you do start blurring the line with the plausible deniability, and then people are like, wait, are you Tim Pool? Were you fucking around for the first few years and you actually got Tim Pool politics? And is this like one of the first few red flags of Andrew Callahan's potential Tim Pool politics? I really hope not. I don't think so. He's a young guy. He's got time to bake, just like we all do. We still have time to learn. But I really hope he doesn't make that his thing, where he starts to hang out with the white supremacists in a non-satirical way. You thought a serious coverage of BLM rallies were actually good. Okay, so yeah. I'd like to think he knows when to punch up and down, right? I think he's a thoughtful guy. But we're in the middle of a very convoluted, complicated geopolitical conflict. I just didn't like the Ukraine video. I don't think he should have made it. I wonder, who he had in his ear saying it was okay. And whether or not they knew that Jake Hanrahan, despite me warning Jake Hanrahan the day before he hit the button to send the $5,300 to United Help Ukraine, I wonder if he knew what he was doing. I think he did. I think people like Jake Hanrahan are doing that to see if there are people like me looking out to see if people like Jake Hanrahan are doing shit like that. He wants to know, whose radar he's on. If you think they're stupid and they're not, then they know when you're looking the other way and what they can get away with. Okay? So don't be stupid. Don't be a shit lib. Don't look at Jake Hanrahan raising money for an organization beloved by Nazis and go, oh, it's okay because Nazis like Starbucks and you do too. Shut the fuck up. All right, so that's sort of also a convoluted thing that I'm bringing in here. There's a lot of weird stuff happening right now that we're sort of subtweeting at the moment. Rad Left Dad in the house. Welcome in. Everyone follow Rad Left Dad, especially on Instagram. You're going to love that content. Love your face. Welcome in. We're talking West hypocrisy regarding the war in Ukraine.
And what's your reaction to the President Biden's recent meeting with President Modi on Monday?
It's very interesting. It's not just Biden. The U.S. State Department sent a high official. The British Foreign Ministry sent their leading cabinet minister, the Foreign Secretary Liz Truss. They all went to India to say, look, how is it possible that India, governed by a right-wing country led by Narendra Modi, a subordinate ally of the United States, a member of the Quad, how is it that India is not willing to come out there and attack the Russian war in Ukraine? How is it that India is not willing to condemn Vladimir Putin and so on? This is a full court press, and inside India, there's been a great deal of frustration. There's questions raised about the so-called finger wagging at India for India's policy. I think that what people need to understand, this is not just India. I mean, India has been, I suppose, the most forthright in refusing to come out there and condemn this war. It's not just India. Look at Germany. Germany continues to buy energy from Russia. The German chancellor directly told Mr. Biden that, look, if Germany breaks ties with Russia, bans natural gas imports, Germany will plunge into a terrible recession. The Japanese prime ministers also told the United States and told the Russians directly, look, we're quite happy to sign on to the G7 statement condemning Russia and its war, but we're not going to cut ties. We're not going to stop importing liquefied natural gas from Sakhalin 2. We're not going to stop importing crude oil. And furthermore, Japan is one of the major investors in Sakhalin 2 and Sakhalin 1. These are very large and important energy projects of the Russian people, the Russian government, but also private sector. And it's the Japanese state that has invested in them. It's not willing to cut all that. So the United States, I think, is coming to realize, or I hope it comes to realize, that many countries, not only so-called adversarial countries, but also countries that are closely allied, like Germany, Japan, India, and so on, are just not willing to break ties. And just let me say one thing about that. You know, for 30 plus years, the US government pushed a globalization agenda, which integrated countries with each other. Russia was at the core of that integration, not only for the export of fuel, but also for the export of the wealth stolen from the state of the USSR after it collapsed. All that money taken by billionaires was invested in international financial markets, and having integrated the world, now suddenly, as the head of the IMF pointed out, suddenly two major shocks take place, the pandemic and then the war and the sanctions. And these two shocks have not been shocks merely to people's household budgets and so on, but they've been shocks to the level of integration of the world economy. And it's very hard for countries to disentangle on a dime just because the US White House says break ties. It's not easy to break ties. It's not a question of political connections. This is a question of deep structural economic relations which cannot be broken. If they break, it will plunge these countries into even greater catastrophe.
During a news conference Monday, India's External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar pointed out Europe buys far more Russian oil and gas than India. This is what he said.
If you are looking at energy purchases from Russia, I would suggest that your attention should be focused on Europe, which probably we do buy some energy which is necessary for our energy security. But I suspect, looking at the figures, probably our total purchases for the month would be less than what Europe does in an afternoon. So you might want to think about it.
So, Vijay Prashad, you can comment on that, but also, as you talk about the rank hypocrisy, I mean, you have not only the United States, but Europe talking about Putin's war crimes. Where would he be tried? A logical forum would be the International Criminal Court. Neither the United States nor Russia, nor Ukraine, for that matter, has fully signed on to the International Court. As it is pointed out over and over again, anti-personnel landmines, just brutal, focused on killing people, that Russia is using in Ukraine. The U.S. hasn't signed on to the anti-landmine treaty that, for example, Princess Di had so campaigned for. So you have all these international treaties that the United States—
That is bleak.
Has not respected, and yet at this point is really invoking the foundation of them to hold Putin accountable. So talking about, as you talk about the rank hypocrisy, do you also criticize, though, Putin for invading Ukraine?
It's like worse than that, though, left justified. It's like, because we don't necessarily want to equate them.
Of course, I criticize Putin for invading Ukraine, Amy. That goes without saying, because he has violated.
I mean, like, war crimes are war crimes, but like, we don't want to equate the amount of them, I guess.
Charter. It is a brutal war, as I said when I first started speaking, but I think that's hardly the question whether I condemn Mr. Putin or not. The issue is that we're living in a world where, for a lot of people, it looks like it's an upside-down world. It's not just the question of the treaties you mentioned. The United States government is...
Yeah, that implies Spider-Man's something still of a good guy. Yeah, nailed it. Thanos pointing at Thanos.
Not signed the international laws of the seas, and yet it
Oh.
prosecutes so-called freedom of navigation missions
Get
against
out.
not only China in the South China Sea, using this UN Charter, which it's not a signatory of, but it has been provoking clashes with Russia in the Black Sea, in the Baltic Sea, and in the Arctic Sea. Again, using these so-called freedom of navigation missions. Let's take the question of the International Criminal
Still
Court.
laughing.
When Special Prosecutor Fatih Bensouda opened a file to investigate war crimes in Afghanistan, and by the way, she was really clear. She said war crimes conducted by everybody, by the Taliban.
It was just so elegant because you stuck with the Marvel. It was just
By the Afghan National
incredible.
Army, by the United States, by other NATO countries, and so on.
Wait.
When she did that, the
Hold on. Is Spider-Man DC? Feels like DC now that I said that out loud.
United States government threatened her, told her that neither she nor her family would ever get a visa to come to the United States, and so on. The UN put enormous pressure on the International Criminal Court to shut down that investigation. That's incredible. This is an investigation of war crimes which are detailed in the US government's own documents, which had been released by the WikiLeaks Foundation, whose founder, Julian Assange, is sitting in Belmarsh prison, is being treated as a criminal, whereas the war criminals in Afghanistan are going free and threatening with mafia-like tactics
Think about
the
it.
special prosecutor at the ICC. Meanwhile,
Think
again,
about it.
in an afternoon, to quote the Indian high official, in an afternoon, the United States is able to get these bodies established by international law, which the United States is not a signatory to. The US, in an afternoon, is able to get them to open a file and start talking about war crimes. Over 1 million people killed in Iraq and no investigation of war crimes. None. Over 1 million people. 500,000 children killed in Iraq during the 1919 sanctions regime. Not even the word genocide. The West is walking all over the word genocide, is reducing the power of an important category, of an important convention, the 1951 Convention Against Genocide. This extraordinary casual and weaponization of human rights and the word
Weaponization.
genocide by the West is going to be something that we are going to face in the times ahead, when other countries are going to say, well, we can do anything if we are backed by Washington, D.C. This is extraordinarily perilous, and I hope people open their eyes to the very cynical way in which Washington, D.C. is approaching this terrible war taking place in Ukraine, a war that has to end with a ceasefire and negotiations, and you're not going to easily...
As we've always said, the way out of this is diplomacy. Adding more arms is not it, you know? Adding more, like going, oh, Russia bad, doing war crimes. We need to send them Ukrainians more arms so they could defend them. Like, no, you're just prolonging the war. Do you care about the civilians or not? If you care about the civilians, we want the war to end as soon as possible. The way out is the same way out as when it started, which is through diplomacy. Oh, damn, but no, you gotta work with Putin. Like, what's the other option? You want Russian regime change? You want to have regime change in a place where they got tons of nukes? Come on, like, what are our options here?
Get a ceasefire and negotiations if you're going to loosely, as Mr. Biden did in Poland at Warsaw Castle, loosely call for regime change in Russia. That is
What the fuck, man? What was I just saying?
not going to help
I did
you
not preview this.
bring people to the table, whether it's in Belarus or it's in Antalya, Turkey. It's not going to bring Ukraine and Russia to the table. It's not going to stop Russia's war. If the Russians think that the United States has a total agenda to annihilate the Russian government, I'm afraid then you're not going to get a ceasefire. You're going to just get more atrocities in Ukraine, and that's something that the people of the world should not stand for.
And Vijay, I wanted to ask you, while this is continuing to...
Well, the fact is, Ross, that our intervention in Ukraine proves to us that we can intervene in places that are occupied. That's literally what this proves to us. If the State Department wanted that, we could have intervened in Palestine a long time ago, but we intervened on, of course, on the wrong side of the border there. Yeah.
Play out this war in
Makes you
Europe,
think.
the role of China, and of course, as you mentioned earlier, the United States has identified China as its long-term strategic foe. Could you talk about what this means about the relationship of these empires and what is and China's role in the world?
Well, let's be frank, Juan. In 2018, the Trump
I don't know Juan's content too well. I usually just cover the headlines when we watch Democracy Now! That's what I'm most familiar with. So Juan's coming off pretty good right now. He's doing all right. I like him.
administration announced that the war on terror was over.
Again, their guests bring the best out of them.
That the full force of the United States government was now going to be to prevent Russia and China. They actually mentioned both countries, Russia and China, what then Defense Secretary Jim Mattis called near-peer competitors. These near-peer competitors had to be prevented from rising. That was the U.S. doctrine, has not been pulled back by the Biden administration. That very year, the United States government unilaterally walked out of the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty, the INF Treaty. Mr. Putin and the Chinese government have said that they fear the placement of mid-level, these intermediate nuclear missiles near the Russian and Chinese border. This meant that they feared that there'd be these missiles placed in Ukraine or in Taiwan and so on. You've got to see it a little bit from their point of view. So they see this as extremely threatening to their existence, and they will do anything to prevent.
Biden told us nothing fundamentally would change. He lied. It got worse somehow, right?
The placement of these
He let those State Department people go haywire.
kind of weapons near their territories. I think this is how the Chinese are seeing it. As far as I've been able to see, the Chinese have neither condemned the war nor applauded it. They would like this war to end. As I said earlier, China's economy is fundamentally integrated into the world economy. The last thing they want to see, and I actually agree on this point.
Touche. He didn't tell that. He wasn't talking to us. He was talking to Wall Street investors. Touche.
Last thing we would like to see is a divided world, an iron curtain fall around Eurasia. Nobody should be actually pleased about that prospect. We want to see a more integrated world, a world of, let's say, where there's a future before us, where we can tackle questions of climate change, we can tackle questions of social toxicity, we can tackle questions of militarism. These things cannot be dealt with if we have an iron curtain fall from the South China Sea to the Baltic Sea. That would be a nightmare for the planet, particularly now when the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has sounded the red alert regarding the climate catastrophe.
Very quickly, Vijay.
This man is just elegant with his rhetoric. I don't know how he does it.
Thursday, the CIA Director William Burns spoke at Georgia Tech, publicly discussed fears Russia could turn to using nuclear weapons out of desperation.
It's the second time she's brought this up in so many days. If this is from yesterday, I think they brought this up twice yesterday. And she says it uncritically. Again, the best part of their show is when their guests talk.
Given the potential desperation of President Putin and the Russian leadership, given the setbacks that they've faced so far militarily, none of us can take lightly.
I know he's going to say it, but I'm still stunned.
The threat posed by a potential resort to tactical nuclear weapons or low-yield nuclear.
I knew he was going to say it, but I'm still surprised.
Nuclear weapons. While we've seen some rhetorical posturing on the part of the Kremlin about moving to higher nuclear alert levels, so far we haven't seen a lot of practical evidence of the kind of deployments or, military dispositions that would,
So, it might all just be CIA propaganda. Who knows?
enforce that concern.
Now, William Burns is an interesting figure, the CIA director, because he's the one who has warned for years, among many others, including progressive peace activists, against NATO moving eastward, saying it will provoke Russia. If you can end...
Folks, I'm going to say this right now. If you want to have like a good opinion about like the world and politics and geopolitics and just the whole thing, you have to be able to like listen to people and as you're listening, be like, yep, that's true. Nope, that's bullshit. Oh my God, that's totally CIA propaganda. There's a nugget of truth in there, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So like, yeah. When he's blathering here, he's doing the CIA propaganda. And when he says that when NATO expands, they're threatening Russia, he was right there. He's correct there. You have to be able to do both.
By talking about what this becoming, this kind of conflagration, a nuclear conflagration, and what you see as the outline of a ceasefire could be.
Oh, God. Amy.
Well, Amy, the first thing I'd say is the question of NATO moving eastward is not the primary issue, because after all, in 2004, Sergei Lavrov, who continues to be the foreign minister, and Mr. Putin, who was even then the president, welcomed the Baltic states and other countries joining NATO. They joined NATO in 2004. The question is not NATO by itself. The question is a sense of security. I mean, what Mr. Burns could have said is that the United States pledges to return to arms control talks. I mean, having gutted the anti-ballistic missile treaty in 2002 unilaterally, that was the Bush administration. And then in 2018, the Trump administration unilaterally walking out of the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty. Why doesn't the United States come to the table, as the Russians have been asking since 2018, and open a new arms control conversation? That seems to be a mature issue. Look, frankly, this ceasefire that takes place in Ukraine could take place in Ukraine in an afternoon, I think. The issue isn't Ukraine alone. It's the question of the US, the question of China, Russia. All of them need to come to a table. They need to discuss a new arms control regime. We don't have one. The world right now has nuclear weapons on hair trigger alerts without a proper arms control regime. That, to me, Amy, is terrifying.
Oh my God, what the fuck could go wrong? What the fuck could go wrong? All it takes is one mistake in that regard, chat. Probably a chain of mistakes, I understand, but still, like, you just and as time progresses, no, it goes this way. As time progresses, there are more and more opportunities for mistakes and chains of mistakes to be made. We need to limit our risk here by getting rid of the nukes.
Needs to be
this
on
is
the
terrifying.
To talk about a ceasefire in Ukraine.
All you have to do is watch Dr. Strangelove, and you'll understand. It's not a real movie, but it sort of can help you to wrap your head around the thing here.
That's got to be there, just as we talk about justice for the Palestinians and so on. But we've also got to recognize we're living right now without an arms control regime, without deterrence. And that really is terrifying.
Vijay Prashad, I want to thank you for being with us. We'll link to your articles, director of the Tricontinental Institute for Social Research. Coming up, Mother Jones editor Mark Fullman. He's author of the new book,
All right, Amy. That was Blamey, Bad Person, and the Democracy Now! Crew. I like what when Juan frames something, he doesn't seem to have to do it from the CIA perspective, but whenever Amy talks, it's always like she's pretty much CIA. What the fuck is going on over there? Right? This happened to me during 2016 when NPR started talking the most shit about Bernie Sanders, obviously the progressive candidate in that race. And I was like, what is happening here? Should always be skeptical, otherwise you'll find yourself in an NPR box like me for 10 years. You'll find yourself watching Democracy Now! Uncritically every day. We watch it every day, but we try to watch it critically. She got replaced with a synthetic. You hate to see it. There's something weird going on there. I think there's something weird going on there, or she was never as left as I thought, or she gave me a false idea of what it was to be left. Left, yeah, like she's got some of the things, she ticks some of the left boxes, but at the end of the day, like, what is it? Neocolonialism, imperialism, colonialism. She doesn't do a good job with that. In terms of piercing through imperial propaganda. That's literally why I hope more people like me make content, to be honest. And I know that my analysis can always improve. My background understanding can always improve. But, dear Lord, I did not love that. Keep in mind how Democracy Now! Is funded. I'm entirely funded through contributions of literal individuals. It's all individuals. It's literally just you people. And then I got about $100 on Patreon each month. Actually less because I give to other creators. All right. Well, with that said, I think we're going to end the clip right there. The clip that I'm currently making. If you're watching on YouTube, please like this video. Comment below. Say something nice. If you downvote it, you're a lib. That's how this works. I don't make the rules. I'm sorry. You can also support on Patreon for as little as $3 a month. You get early access to all my chats with always based, and never cringe champions and friends. All right. All right. The stream will continue, but this clip is ending. Bye. Love your face.